Please don't forget the money, man.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings.
All right, so let's recap this past week. We had 7 ranked teams go down, so let's tackle our recap here. Let's start with some of the shocking results. Number 22, Kansas State drills number 9, Oklahoma State, 48-0 in a stunning game where Kansas State more than doubled up in yardage. They won the turnover margin 3-0. Kansas State scored 5 touchdowns on 7 possessions in the first half and just coasted throughout this entire game. You thought the Cowboys would punch back at some point, and it never, ever came. It was like a practice round for the Wildcats, who came out and just continued to punch the Cowboys in the face. Adrian Martinez didn't even play. He was questionable for this game. It was the backup Will Howard, who was 21 for 37 for 296 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had 5 carries for only 3 yards, as the quarterback is very much a part of that offense as well and running the football, and he did not have to do that today. It's basically the Deuce Vaughn show. He averaged 7.2 yards per carry for 158 yards and 1 touchdown, including a big 62-yarder in the first quarter. He also had a receiving touchdown. It was the first time since 2009 the Cowboys were shut out of a football game. It was just a thumping. Again, Oklahoma State never got going. It was one of those games where you could check out like 20 minutes into the game and just briefly check in for a few minutes in the second half, and the Cowboys just never came back. So Kansas State very much still in the hunt of the Big 12 Conference. Oklahoma State in some trouble now. It sounded like with as many injuries as they've had and as many guys banged up, that there were a few differences in practice this week, that Gundy held some guys out or did just a few things a little bit differently, and that could have had some consequences on the result of this game. But 48-0 is just astounding. So an upset there. Number 3, Tennessee hammered number 6, Kentucky, 44-6. Only a shocking result because it wasn't a contest. Will Levis was 16 for 27 for 98 yards and 3 picks. A guy who was projected to be a top quarterback in the NFL draft. And despite an awful offensive line, sometimes you just need to get up and make some plays, and he is not doing that. So I think his stock is dropping. I think that's safe to say at this point. Only 205 yards of offense for the Wildcats, 3.6 yards per pass. The Vols now have 5 wins over ranked teams, and Georgia is next on the slate. Now, the Wildcats obviously didn't cover the 2-touchdown spread. It wasn't even close. Again, 44-6, just a hammering there. Just a shocking result. Moving on to number 10, Wake Forest and Louisville. And again, I thought this was a weird spread. Wake Forest favored by 3 or 4 points here going into the football game. And Louisville had not looked so great this season at all. It was 14-13 Wake Forest at the half. And then the third quarter came and they had 6 turnovers in the third quarter alone. 8 turnovers in the second half, 8 turnovers in the whole football game. 3 picks and 3 fumbles by Sam Hartman, the super quarterback there. He ended up getting benched. And this was 1 week after Miami had 8 turnovers against Duke as the first Power 5 8 turnover game since like 2009. I don't have the stat in front of me at the moment. But it was so strange that, it was just decided to turn around and do it again the next week. So back-to-back Power 5 games with a Power 5 team committing 8 turnovers in a football game. Weird. Anyways, 6 turnovers in the third quarter. 2 of them were pick sixes, and just an epic Wake Forest collapse. Certainly the defense was disruptive, but man, just a weird circumstance. Freshman Mitch Griffiths also came out and had a pick, the backup quarterback. Malik Cunningham came out. He was only 15 for 23 for 164 yards and 38 yards on the ground, although 2 rushing touchdowns. And the Cards had 9 penalties, didn't convert as many third downs. They had 8 fewer yards, but obviously the turnovers were the problem there. Short fields, and just a big win for Louisville and a big loss for Wake Forest. Now, Notre Dame beat number 16 Syracuse on the road 41-24. The Irish had a pick 6 to open the game, and they just gashed the Orange on the ground from there like Clemson did last week for 246 yards. Drew Payne was only 9 for 19 for 116 yards passing, Carlos DeRio Wilson came in at quarterback and was 11 for 22 for 190 yards, a touchdown and a pick, after Schrader was 5 for 14 for 35 yards, a touchdown and a pick for the Orange. So none of these teams are very impressive still. Not very good at quarterback, just a ground game. And Notre Dame came out on top as Syracuse has now dropped 2 in a row. And we now have an ACC where Clemson's undefeated, North Carolina has 1 loss, and everyone else has 2 or more. So the window's getting very tight on challengers to possibly make the playoffs in that particular conference. Number 20, Cincinnati fell 25-21 to UCF on the road. The Bearcats didn't really force UCF to throw the ball into a mistake, which could have been one of the keys to winning this football game. But John Rhys Plumlee was 7 for 11, then was knocked out early. It was backup Mikey Keene who looked good, going 15 for 21 passing. The Knights did have 2 turnovers, both fumbles, and it was actually Cincinnati's ground game that was shut down. On the other hand, Montgomery cracked a 39-yarder. Montgomery averaged 3.3 yards per carry, but it was really just that one big run that got them anything on the ground. Now, UCF had 258 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns. Not a lot of problems there. They had 170 yards more offense than Cincinnati, who's now basically out of the playoffs and possibly out of the New Year's Six discussion, leaving the door open for the Tulane Green Wave. And number 25, South Carolina lost 23-10 to Missouri. That wasn't shocking to me. The Gamecocks have found little edges in special teams to win games and score touchdowns, but Missouri has a real defense. When you get 2 teams together like this that don't really have good offenses and are really middling teams all together, Missouri with a good defense basically just shut the Gamecocks down and did enough to win the football game. They almost doubled up on yardage, 367 to 203. South Carolina was averaging 5.7 yards per pass and a 1.4 per carry and had 2 turnovers. Missouri's now 4-4. They had a 28-point loss at Kansas State, but they lost by 3 points at Auburn, 4 to Georgia, 7 at Florida. It's not too bad for a team that was supposed to be one of the 3 or 4 worst in the SEC. It's not great either, but at least they're hanging around with teams. So let's hit our close call recaps. Thursday night, number 14 Utah beat Washington State 21-17. This game was only a close call because Cam Rising was a game-time scratch, surprising to everyone, including the broadcast crew. The top rusher and top receiver were also out for the Utes as they were trying to rest on a short week and kind of recover there on a rather difficult road game that they still were able to pull out there. And now they'll get an extended rest period, 9 days, I believe, 10-ish days to recover for the next game. And Washington State only had 264 yards total, 42 on the ground. They're not doing well there. They had 2 turnovers. The defense for Utah had 4 sacks, and they were able to just escape here and resting their top guys on the offensive side that were all banged up. It's a tough loss for Washington State, who falls to 4-4. Hopefully they'll still make a bowl game. And again, Utah still staying in the Pac-12 conference race in a tough Thursday night road game with a number of people out. So not a whole lot you can really take from that from the Utah side. Also, on Friday night, number 24 NC State led 3-0 at the half against Virginia Tech. They came back from a tough rally in the third quarter from Virginia Tech to win 22-21 in the fourth at the end of regulation, of course. Freshman MJ Morris came off the bench at quarterback. He was 20 for 29 for 265 yards and 3 touchdowns. So the Wolfpack might have some luck there at quarterback moving forward through at least the rest of this season into next year, starting their 3rd quarterback in 4 games so far this season. On Saturday, number 7 TCU beat West Virginia 41-31. The Horned Frogs scored a late touchdown to win by double digits. There were 7 touchdowns in the first 9 possessions in the first half of this football game, so it was all points all the time, just a shootout. Now the second half tightened up a little bit, turnover on downs, punt, field goal, so we slowed down from both sides in the second half after some adjustments. TCU finished averaging 12.2 yards per completion and 5.7 per carry. That is wild. Max Duggan again had 341 yards and 3 touchdowns in the big game. Condre Miller had 12 carries for 120 yards on the dot and a touchdown. That's 10 yards per carry. Just wild on the offensive end. If their defense can pick up the slack a little bit, we'd be talking about a national contender here, a national championship contender. So TCU escapes again to move to 8-0, the Horned Frogs on the West Virginia Mountaineers. Number 10, USC over Arizona, 45-37. Now USC's been banged up. Receivers Jordan Addison and Mario Williams are out. They had a starting guard out, some defensive guys, a linebacker out, but they managed to win this football game. It cruised over the over 75.5 it was originally. Both teams averaging close to 9 yards per pass. Arizona, I think, slightly under. USC slightly over 6 yards per carry as well. They combined for 1,164 yards of offense. 13 penalties combined as well for 120 yards. Actually slowed it down a bit. Some weird penalties, though, as well. Some weird refereeing. But taking out the end possessions of each half, so possessions that weren't finished off, USC had 10 of them. They finished with 1 punt and 2 missed field goals, which aren't good signs, but they had 1 made field goal and 6 touchdowns. So 70% of the time they were converting into points. 60% of the time they were converting into touchdowns. Arizona had 11 possessions. They had 2 punts, 2 turnovers. 1 was on downs, 1 was a pick. 3 field goals and 4 touchdowns. So USC was just able to get a few stops there. Jaden DeLora had 380 yards and 3 touchdown passes. All 3 of them were caught by Dorian Singer, who also counted for 141 yards. He had 7 total receptions. Caleb Williams had 411 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. Some career highs there. Taja Washington had 7 grabs for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns as a kind of backup receiver there, with some of the top guys being out. Travis Dye had 20 carries for 113 yards and a touchdown as well, in just an offensively loaded football game there. And number 15, Ole Miss pulled out a 31-28 game against Texas A&M, lowly old Texas A&M, which has been hot in the college football news cycle recently. The score was 24-14 heading into the fourth quarter, with all the Aggies points coming in the first. They put up 2 more scores in the fourth to keep it interesting. Jimbo Fisher started freshman Connor Wingman and moved with a little bit more up-tempo to keep things interesting. He looks like a promising quarterback. Again, he was the 4th quarterback they've started this year, partially due to injuries, partially due to poor performance, but it looks like they should have a real promising kid here. Devon Achane accounted for 171 yards of offense on 32 touches, so no surprises there. But 34 carries for 205 yards and a touchdown from Quinshawn Judkins was too much from the Rebels, the star running back there. Jackson Dart also had 95 yards on the ground and 140 in the air for 3 passing touchdowns, and the team finished with 390 rushing yards, over 300 yards for the 4th time in 8 games this season. Now this next group I call the pulled away group, the games where the higher, better team was able to pull away late. Number 1, Georgia over Florida, 42-40. That's not the correct score. 42-24. Brock Bowers for Georgia had the catch of the game at the tight end position. He finished with 5 of them for 154 yards and a touchdown in the blowout win, but neither quarterback was very good. Stetson Bennett was 18 for 38 for 316, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Mr. Richardson was 18 for 37 for 271 and a passing touchdown. Only 19 yards on 11 carries, just gross there. Georgia actually lost the turnover battle 3-0, but was never really in danger, even as the Gators made it a 1-score game briefly in the second half. But Florida does not have it this year. Richardson's still a year away, another offseason to kind of get his breeding defenses and all that kind of together. This is just definitely not Florida's year, obviously, as you can tell record-wise, but the performance on the field is just awful. And there's just a number of places where I've heard that you're always afraid of what Richardson's going to do. And he's looked downright disgusting in at least 6 of the 8 games they've played this year. He's either a throwing threat or a running threat, but he's never both at the same time. Sometimes he's really misreading defenses. He's got a really nice release and a strong throw, but man, he's just all over the place. And Florida's just a bad football team right now. One SEC conference win so far, and they'll be lucky to make a bowl game. Georgia's got a big game, of course, against Tennessee this week. Now, number 2, Ohio State won 44-31 over Penn State in what was an exciting ball game for 3 quarters. Ohio State trailing in the 4th after Penn State, let's say they had a 1-point lead, turning to an 8-point lead after they scored a touchdown in the 4th. Then Ohio State scored 28 points in 6 minutes and 9 seconds, I believe it was, to turn the game into a blowout. Sean Clifford was actually 32 for 47 passing for 3 touchdowns and 3 picks. 47 passing attempts. Tula Mola, I'll never get that name right, but he's talked about all over the place now after this performance. 2 sacks, including a strip sack and a pick 6 to put the game away. 5-star defensive performance all over the board. Top sophomore and a late recruit for Ohio State. Just a star of this football game that really helped put it away for him. CJ Stroud was 26 for 33 for 354 yards. Great stat line there, but only 1 touchdown out of it. Marvin Harris Jr., monster performance, 10 catches for 185 yards. Again, their top receiver, Nixon Jigbu, has been out again, and I don't know that we'll see a whole lot of him the rest of this year. He's just hurt all the time. He has still only played, 2 full games and only registered a handful of receptions, so I'm not sure we'll see much more of him, but Ohio State continues to pump out receivers there. And Ohio State, 1 full performance of greatness there, but still, when you can turn that on so quickly and just slaughter a team, that still shows some level of greatness and superiority. So I'm not sure that they're going to be stopped outside of the Michigan game coming up here. Speaking of Michigan, they ranked number 4 at the time. They won over Michigan State 29-7. Michigan just couldn't get the ball into the end zone early, settled for 3 or 4 field goals, and it wasn't until late after grinding through that they were eventually able to put Michigan State away. Spartans had 1 touchdown early in the first quarter, and they didn't move the ball again. The defense starting to look a little better, but Michigan is just a superior football team. I still have questions about J.J. McCarthy and his ability to make big throws when necessary. And I'm not even talking about this football game. They weren't necessary for this football game, but he's going to have to make some throws eventually to win football games, 1 or 2 even in a big game, to convert downs or to score touchdowns. Ohio State might be the only one on the schedule this season where you can say quarterback made a real difference, whether it was JJ or Cade in that particular instance. But he did not look real great in this game, I didn't think. But Michigan beat Michigan State 29-7. There was a scuffle in the tunnel afterwards. 4 players are suspended for Michigan State, and it was serious enough that they may no longer be with the team. So, worth noting there. And finally, number 21, North Carolina scored 21 unanswered points in the 4th quarter to beat Pittsburgh 42-21. And all your top guys got their stats in this one. Drake May, of course, had 5 touchdown passes, 388 yards, 34 for 44 passing. Again, he might be one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the country. He might be better than CJ Stroud or Bryce Young at this point. He is just a marvel to watch. Both his guys, 8. Antonio Green, 10 catches, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns. Josh Downs, 11 catches, 102 yards, and 2 touchdowns. May also carried the ball 14 times for 61 yards, according to the tally sheet. And on the other side, Pittsburgh's top running back, Israel, had 26 carries for 127 yards and another 3 touchdowns. But the Panthers are now 4-4. Tough loss there for those guys. But, man, what a great running back he is. If only he was on, the Tar Heels. We'd have a real national championship team there. But the defense, man, the defense for the Heels is going to be their undoing. But they continue to roll up wins here. Finally, the taking care of business section. Oregon scored 21 of their 41 points in the second quarter in a 42-24 win over Cal. Bo Nix accounted for all 6 touchdowns, 3 passing, 3 rushing. He threw for 412 yards and completed over 75% of his passes. He did have a couple picks. One was just before half. It meant nothing, just throwing the ball down towards the end zone. And he did throw one in the red zone, which wasn't good. But other than that, he had a great performance. And staying in the Pac-12, number 12 UCLA beat Stanford 38-13. Zach Charbonnet had 198 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns. He also had 5 catches for 61 yards. So that's a total of 26 touches at over 9.5 yards per touch every time he touched the ball, which is just wild. He's such a superstar for that team. So, of course, Oregon, UCLA, USC, who escaped, Utah, who's banged up but escaped. All teams in the hunt for a Pac-12 crown there, and still in the hunt for the playoffs. Just a wide spread there in the Pac-12 side of things. And finally, number 17, Illinois beat Nebraska 26-9. The Huskers lost Casey Thompson early. He wasn't playing well. Completed 50% of his passes, had a couple picks, but still, he is the only thing that's driving that offense over there. They're not running the ball well. They had less than 100 yards. I think they had like 60 yards rushing. Backup quarterback couldn't do anything. And Illinois just had no problem stopping Nebraska once he went down. Tommy DeVito was 20 for 22 passing for Illinois in an efficient day there. Chase Brown had 32 carries for 149 yards and a touchdown, as they didn't need to do much. Once Nebraska couldn't move the ball offensively, there's no threat there. So that is a quick wrap up of your week of college football with 7 ranked teams going down. Just a couple other quick notes. Virginia and Miami played the grossest 4 overtime game you've ever seen. There were no touchdowns until the 4th overtime, or until overtime there were no touchdowns at all. It was a 14-12 final. Both teams combined for barely 600 yards of offense. It was thoroughly disgusting, as we know both of these teams are horrible. Miami, though, with a win, moves to 4-4, but just a horrible game there. Boise State stays undefeated in the Mountain West, beating Colorado State 49-10, so they're the front runner in that conference. Baylor might stay in the hunt in the Big 12. They're now 3-2 in conference play after hammering Texas Tech 45-17. The Red Raiders playing yet another quarterback there. I'm not sure what number we're on for that squad now, but another quarterback there as the Red Raiders are blown out at home by the Baylor Bears. And I think it's worth noting that BYU, that started the season in the top 25 poll, now has a losing record. They're 4-5 after losing on a last-second field goal to East Carolina 27-24 in a rough season for the BYU Cougars. They're going to struggle to make a bowl game at this point. On to your weekday watch guide. Thanks to some action, it'll start on this Tuesday, November 1st, the day after Halloween, and we'll have the playoff rankings here tonight as well at the same time. So one station will have action, the other station will have the playoff rankings being revealed. So on ESPNU at 7 o'clock, Kent State at 3-5 will be hosting Ball State at 4-4. Now Carson Steele is currently 13th, Marquez Cooper 17th in rushing nationally for Ball State and Kent State respectively, the top 2 rushers in the MAC conference. Both also have 8 touchdowns and are averaging 4.6 yards per carry. They're 3rd and 4th nationally in rushing attempts as well. Now both squads also have top receivers to look out for. Ja'Shawn Jackson for Ball State, the 5'10 senior, has 54 catches for 633 yards. That's 11.7 yards per grab. Top 20 to 30 in those specific categories. He has 2 touchdowns on the year. Kent State has 6'1 junior Dante Sifris. Top 30 in the same categories, 47 catches, 731 yards. That's 15.6 yards per grab. 3 touchdowns on the year. 6'1 sophomore Devontae Walker has 41 catches, 616 yards. That's 15 yards per catch on heavy volume, with 7 touchdowns as well. Now, Kent State is favored by a touchdown, has much better playmakers. They put up 20 points on Washington, 22 on Georgia, 31 on Toledo, all in losses. They did beat Ohio, a good MAC team, 31-24. It's everything else on the team that's not very good. Just those 2 or 3 skill position guys there. So this could be an interesting matchup between Kent State and Ball State on ESPNU. At 7:30, Ohio is 5-3. They're hosting Buffalo at 5-3 on ESPN2. These are the top 2 teams in the MAC right now. Curtis Rourke for Ohio is 10th nationally in passing yards with 2,408. He has 16 touchdowns and 3 interceptions on the season. He's completing 68.3% of his passes, the best quarterback in the MAC right now. Buffalo is really winning on the defensive side of the ball. Linebacker Sean Dolick has 62 solo tackles on the year first in the country. Safety Marcus Fuqua is tied for the most interceptions in the country with 5. The Buffalo's averaging 36 points per game in MAC play. They won a big game a couple weeks back, 34-27 against Toledo, to remain unbeaten in the conference, the only unbeaten team, and they've now won 5 straight, and they're coming out of a bye here. Buffalo's a field goal favorite on the road, 4-0 in MAC conference play again. Ohio's 3-1, so if the Bobcats do win the game here, they'll put them in first place in the MAC East, and arguably the current title as the top team in the conference. So a nice game there on ESPN2 between Ohio and Buffalo. Rolling over to Wednesday, November 2nd, Northern Illinois is 2-6. They're hosting Central Michigan, who's 2-6 on ESPNU. Thomas Incoom on the defensive line has 7.5 sacks, tied for third most in the country for Central Michigan. Otherwise, these two teams are 2 of the 4 worst in the MAC outside of Akron and possibly Western Michigan right now due to injuries to key players. Matt Lombardi, the former Michigan State Spartan transfer for the Huskies of Northern Illinois, has been out. He might return for this game to give them a boost. Central Michigan's been without last season's top rusher in the country, and Lewis Nichols III the past couple of games. He might be back as well, but both these teams will suffer and continue to reflect their records, obviously, at 2-6 if they're without their key players. There's a better game on, though. At that same time slot, 7 o'clock, ESPN2, Bowling Green at 4-4 is hosting that Western team at 3-5. Now, I haven't watched a ton of Bowling Green, but they are 3-1. They beat Marshall, Akron, Miami of Ohio, and Central Michigan. Not great teams, but they could continue to roll up the record to 5-1 in conference play before playing Toledo and Ohio on the road to end the season. Now, Carl Brooks, the defensive end from Lansing, Michigan, has 7.5 sacks on the season, tied for third best nationally. They have 20 sacks and 9 forced turnovers in 4 MAC games so far. The offense is awful. They can't run. The quarterback has 16 touchdowns to 3 picks, but he's been sacked 18 times. He's completing 58% of his passes for 6.8 yards per grab. That is not very good. Western seems to have a couple of good linebackers there, Sire, Barnes, and Corvin Moment, but they're not a very good team either. They're averaging 20 points per game in MAC conference play. That doesn't even include the games against Michigan State, Pittsburgh, San Jose State, the non-conference slate, where they're averaging less than 10 points per game in those 3. But a little bit better game. Bowling Green, maybe they can get a win here and continue to roll before playing some big games towards the end of the season. On Thursday, November 3rd at 7 o'clock, Rice is 4-4. They're hosting the UTEP Miners at 4-5 on the CBS Sports Network. Now, Jaden Taylor, different spelling, Jadrian Taylor. Jaden Taylor, the defensive end for the Miners, has 8 sacks. That's tied for most in the country as we see some of these standout defensive players on some of these small school rosters. Now, Rice was hammered 56-23 by Charlotte last week, who just fired their coach. Both teams have lost 2 of 3 coming into this game, and it could be a bull eliminator for the loser. So just not a great rundown here, but again, Jaden Taylor on the defensive end for UTEP, one of the more outstanding players. Rice had a hot start to the season, but has fallen off recently, and these two teams just getting beat up in Conference USA play, where even in that conference, there are better quality teams. At 7:30, Coastal Carolina's 7-1. They're hosting Appalachian State, who's 5-3. This game will be on ESPN. App State is actually favored by 2.5 here on the road. Might be a little shocking to see it for the first time if you haven't paid attention to these two teams, understandably. That App State is a little bit better rounded squad here. They hammered Georgia State and Robert Morris the last 2 outings, but they've had a really rough schedule. North Carolina, Texas A&M, Troy, who's been a good team, James Madison, they split those games. They had a weird loss at Texas State a couple weeks back to get to this point. Now, Chase Bryce at quarterback has 22 touchdowns, 4 picks to pilot this pretty high-scoring offense, just under 37 points per game. Coastal Carolina had a nice win at Marshall coming out of their bye week after being embarrassed at homecoming to Old Dominion, just a blowout, bludgeoning loss there. Now, Grayson McCall is still the star of this team, who's been in the rankings a few times the past couple of years. He has 2,061 passing yards on the season, one of the top quarterbacks in that category. 68% completion rate, 19 touchdowns, 1 pick so far. Another 4 rushing touchdowns as well. So he's been efficient in that aspect. This team also has 8 picks and 11 fumble recoveries on the defensive side, but 6 of their 7 wins against not very great quality opponents have been by 10 points or less, so they are not blowing people out. The offensive side as a whole isn't overwhelming. The defensive side, despite forcing turnovers, is not stifling. Yet this team, much like 7-1 Liberty, is 7-1 as well. And Appalachian State here, rolling in at 5-3, still competing, both teams, for a Sun Belt Conference title. This will be a good matchup in the non-Power 5 slate. 7:30 on ESPN on Thursday night. Heading to Friday, November 4th. Now 7 o'clock on CBS Sports Network, UConn at 4-5 will be hosting UMass, who's 1-7. UConn can move a game away from bowl eligibility with a big win. Linebacker Jackson Mitchell is second in the country in total tackles with 100. He also has 4.5 sacks, a pick, a couple forced fumbles. He's been a solid player for them. They aren't very good, but they did beat Boston College 13-3 last week in a massive Power 5 win for the program. They were outgained and had 10 penalties, but Boston College has had a ton of injuries. The offensive line basically has defensive line players playing on it with the number of injuries they've had and other guys filling in. Boston College had 5 turnovers. They averaged 2.5 yards per carry. It was a mess for them last week. Now the Huskies really need this one because home against Liberty and a road game to Army to finish the season are not great to see upcoming if you want a win. So they're going to have to grab this one while it's on the slate and hope for an upset to make a bowl game. But they're on the right track there. Also at 7 o'clock on ESPN2 will be our crappy Power 5 game of the week, and that is this Boston College team at 2-6 hosting Duke, who's 5-3. Now Philip Djorkovic is struggling, so Emmett Moorhead, the freshman quarterback, is getting snaps for the Boston College Eagles, so we'll see who plays there, or if we get a little bit of both quarterbacks if things get out of hand. Duke is second in the ACC Coastal, but they're so far behind North Carolina, they've lost 3 of 5. There's just no chance of really catching them. The Tar Heels have all but wrapped that up. The last win they had, they coming off a bye week, was the 8-turnover game against Miami. But this team will probably be ready to go. Riley Leonard is the team's leading rusher at the quarterback position, and that leads to some interesting offensive drives, but this team overall has kind of fizzled down the stretch after a great 4-0 start. You're watching this game to see if either quarterback can get things going. Leonard will be back next year. Djorkovic will be hoping for more at the next level, the NFL level. Although with the crappy play around him, you're not sure that scouts are seeing a whole lot. You're hoping that they can see his physical tools to see if he can produce at the next level. So you are an NFL scout. What is the quarterback looking like here? Can we get something to produce at the next level from the Boston College quarterback Phil there? And will Duke be able to take a step forward next season? At 10:30, Washington 6-2. They're hosting number 24 Oregon State at 6-2. The Huskies favored at home by 4.5 against this ranked Beavers team. Now Michael Penix Jr. is still atop the country in passing yards, but the Huskies don't play a lot of defense in general, and the Beavers play solid defense but aren't very threatening on the offensive end from just a very broad perspective. Washington scored a season-low 28 points last week. They're averaging 40 points per game, a little bit over that, while Oregon State has only given up more than 28 twice all season. Now, both of these teams have played some bad Pac-12 teams the past couple weeks, so it's hard to see where exactly they're at, but Washington's passing attack is the most consistent aspect here. Oregon State wants to run, but Washington has tightened that up a little bit recently, although against bad teams or teams that don't really want to pound the ball, like Washington State recently. The Beavers could force a bad Penix game, which we've seen where he's throwing 2, 3, 4 picks a game. That certainly happens, but it should be a good chess match to see what happens here. The Oregon Beavers have been playing with a different quarterback recently, and it'll just be interesting to see the different teams here. And Washington favored at home against the Oregon State Beavers. Which team will prevail? So those are your weekday watches. Of course, the reveal of the current top 25. The current top 25 is out, but the playoff rankings will be coming out Tuesday, and I'll drop another pod with your weekend watches after that and my thoughts on the current playoff rankings. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a